Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
What's a horrifying experience you have lived?
256. It was New Year's Eve 10+ years ago now. My cousin and I spent the night celebrating in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and sometime around 1:30, 2 a.m. we decided to head back home, which is a 30-minute drive away. As we were getting onto the highway from the one ramp, there were two cars in front of our vehicle. The car at the front was driving very slowly, 15 to 20 miles per hour, entering the highway. The car immediately in front of us passed this slower car at the first opportunity they had, and then I followed suit. When I passed this car, an old Cadillac or Buick, I looked over at what appeared to be a middle-aged white male with dark slicked-back hair. As soon as I stepped onto the gas and zipped down the highway, this slower car speeds up and starts tailgating us. It's late, it's dark, and there weren't any other cars on this stretch of the highway. My first thought was to pull over when I had an opportunity, and maybe this guy will just pass me and go about his merry way. Wrong. He pulls up right behind me, with his high beams on, and just sits there. At this point, my cousin is freaking out and worried this man might have a gun, etc. So, I put the car into drive, stepped on the gas, and darted back onto the highway. The next 2 miles were fairly winding, and I had made some distance on him, so I made the first right turn I saw, drove straight up this steep road, and cut on my lights, hoping to shake this person following us. As I got to the top of the hill, I slowed down and pulled a U-turn. To my dismay, I saw the same car turning onto the same road and gun it straight up the hill towards my car as I'm turning it around. The car approached mine and the driver tried to T-bone us, but luckily we dodged his vehicle and sped down the road, back towards the main road. At this point, I was driving 100 miles per hour plus, hoping to get pulled over, hoping to see another car on the road, completely panicking. The next closest town was Hershey. I felt some relief as I knew where the police station was behind the Staples on Main. I busted a right turn and drove back towards the police station with this car still on my track snuffing. The lights are out, the station is closed. I'm dumbfounded. It's New Year's Eve night and not a single DUI checkpoint? It's the first and only time in my life that I've wished to have an interaction with law enforcement. So, I swung the car back around, cut through the empty Staples parking lot, almost crashed into a metal pole in the process, cut back onto Main Street and turned off onto the side streets that I was familiar with, as quickly as possible. My cousin and I still talk about this whenever we see each other. It's a night I'll never forget. I'm not sure why we were targeted, but I'm sure our lives would have been in danger if that person could have caught us. 257. Not sure if this is sleeping paralysis? I remember being extremely sick my junior year of high school and went blind in one eye. My vision has returned since then. During this time, I was sleeping in my older sister's room, who was away at college. I was sleeping and I knew I was sleeping, but I couldn't wake up. I heard someone whisper my name. I kept trying to roll over or move in some way, but was unable. The whisper happened again a little louder this time, but I was still unable to move. The third whisper of my name was the loudest and most frightening, and that was the one that woke me up. I assumed that my mom had been calling me, however when I woke up, there was absolutely no one around. Everyone else was asleep. No clue where that came from. My second experience, I was at a resort in Jamaica, and had swum out to one of those big water trampoline things. It was raining, and other people were in the water, but no one was quite nearby. I stuck my legs underneath the trampoline before attempting to climb up it. When I did this, what felt like human hands grabbed my leg and yanked on it. I just so happened to still be holding on to the ladder, so I kicked. The grip released and I swam back to shore as fast as I could. Very weird. 258. Our shed caught on fire and the whole thing was burning. We have a tall tree over it like it starts about 4 meters above the shed, and to this day half of it is still gone. It was a huge fire a meter away from our gas balloons. We had to evacuate, and at that time we had 2 dogs. One of them was an outside dog. We couldn't find her, and my dad rushed into the fire looking for her, but he couldn't see her. after we evacuated to the neighbors through a fence, we found her laying there in front of our neighbor's gate. This was about 7 years ago. 2:59, I was about 7. My mean was having a garage sale, and we had about 13 people in our front yard. I'm off to the side of everything petting my dog Tessa, rip baby girl, and this man approached me. He asked me what kind of dog she was, and started to pet her. He made up some kind of story about how vets never check for fleas around the top of their tail. The whole time he kept looking back at the porch at my grandmother, who was almost out of line of sight. My mean came around the corner and hollered at me to get on the porch, and the guy just left. I didn't realize it till years later, after randomly remembering the moment. She had saved me from a child predator. 2:60, one time me and my family were having a meal outside around 8 to 10 p.m. and don't remember the exact time. We thought we heard our front gate open, but sometimes it's just a truck passing that hit a bump or something. Before I finish, I need to explain that we have 2 gates, before you get to our yard. About a minute later, my sister has this frozen expression on her face, and she said she saw someone's face looking at us. I was very young back then, and so was my sister, so we sort of started to freak out a bit. We heard the gate close again. My older sister stayed with me, and my sister, when my mom called the police while following my dad. While I was waiting with my sisters for my parents to come back, I found out that my dad actually chased the guy for like 5 minutes, scared the guy. My dad is a pretty big man, a bit over 6 feet, pretty muscular too. I don't think my dad caught up to the guy, but after he came back, we gave a little description of the man and the police went looking for him. They never found him though. 2:61, one day I got grounded and was permitted to no TV for the day, and so with nothing to do I went to bed at 8 p.m. I forgot to close my blinds, so any peeping toms could just go into my backyard and watch me. Well, during that same night, I woke up around 3 a.m. I couldn't really tell as my mom took away my phone, but I'm really just guessing. I was about to get up to get some warm milk when I saw a shadow where my window's reflection was. My flight or fight response kicked in and I froze right on sight. I didn't dare look to where my window was, so I was just staring at the shadow, in bed, and not moving. Though after what felt like hours I went back to sleep, and when I woke up it was gone. I tried telling my friends, and they said I hallucinated. But it looked so real. 2:62, when I was about 14 or 15 I was with a friend babysitting. We were sitting outside, and 2 dudes had been hanging out walking back and forth. The last time we saw them they were running behind the house, through some heavy bushes. We went in, the kids were in bed, and we were sitting on the sofa watching TV. All of a sudden we heard creaking noises, and thought one of the little kids was up. We heard the creaking again, and my friend's face went pale. She turned and was facing the side of the stairs, and saw a man's shoe coming down the stairs. When she told me we both screamed, jumped up and ran to the porch, calling the police. They came and searched the house, not finding anything. What they did find was the attic window had been opened and the screen ripped out. The police believed the guys that had been outside had used the trees and fence to get up to the attic to get inside the house. Luckily, we heard them before they got to us, and that gave us time to call for help. There's been a lot of creepy things that have transpired in my life, but this one I had no control over and did not put myself in a position to make it happen. Someone in the house. Creepy. 2:63. Just as a premise, I realize my life is much better than some people on this thread, and my experience probably doesn't compare to most others on here. With that being said, when I was 7 years old, I was riding the school bus on my way home from school. For some reason, the bus driver dropped me off at another part of the city I live in. Throughout my entire life, I've lived in the same city, and it's a medium-large city, and as an adult, it can be tricky to find everywhere on foot, let alone as a 7-year-old kid. I was about 30 minutes walking distance from my babysitter's house, and it was about 18 to 20 degrees outside, but luckily, I could always take freezing weather very well. I was actually able to get the direction to my babysitter's house almost down pat, but I was just one street over from where I was supposed to be. I knocked on the door of the house, and as I expected, it was the wrong house. An elderly couple welcomed me in, gave me an entire bowl of candy, and they saw the name of the school I went to imprinted on my shirt. They called the school, and the school contacted my mom. The elderly couple drove me to the school, and when I arrived, my mom hugged me, and she was crying so hard because I had been missing for about 5 hours. As a 7-year-old going through that, I still remember almost every detail of that afternoon. It was terrifying being lost in this big, cold, and gloomy city, and just struggling to find the right house, while trying to avoid traffic, and other potentially dangerous people. 264. So for my whole life I've experienced sleep paralysis and sleep apnea. While having difficulty breathing while in a deep sleep is awful, sleep paralysis is where it gets terrifying. It happens about 3 to 4 nights per week, but happens dozens of times throughout the night. Put it this way. Imagine dreaming, and then your brain slowly wakes and your eyes open, but your body muscles stay asleep. At this point, I can't move anything except for my eyes, and since I'm still in a state of sleep, the real-world state appears somewhat distorted and can cause hallucinations. Sometimes I don't see anything, but other times I see shadowy figures or demons. For some reason, these figures will come towards me and perform what my brain fears. For me, I hate being tickled. Imagine being awake and seeing shadowy figures slowly crawl towards you and start tickling and scratching you. Keep in mind I can somehow feel it, and I can't move, so there's literally nothing I can do about it. I have to harness the power within myself in order to jolt awake. But since I'm half asleep, I instantly fall back asleep. And again, this cycle can happen a dozen times in one night's sleep. I hope this doesn't happen to you. 265. Headphones to Another Dimension, December 31st, 2020, at 12:05 to 12:43 a.m. As usual, I'm surfing on my laptop whilst using headphones, and peculiarly, I start hearing this somewhat static but bearable noise. I unplug the cord and plug it again, but to no avail. The sound is still there, so I thought to myself that my hands-free is at its end and producing this strange static noise. 10 minutes in, and this static noise morphs into the sound of what you could typically hear in a dense forest or a house in some village after midnight. I could also hear the insects usually found in such areas. Add a few more minutes in, and this noise morphs into a car passing by alongside the previous noise. Thus, in your mind, you take a picture of this unknown road in an unknown place. A few minutes more in, and I start hearing the barking of a demonic dog. Few seconds in, and I start hearing the sound of the shovel hitting the ground, very oddly. Now I'm more attentive to it. Keep in mind that at this point I have closed everything on my laptop and there is no source I could find for this. Trust me, I know my stuff. All these sounds together yet in a static but bearable noise is now giving me chills, and then I hear whispering. This whispering is some language you cannot understand. Now I'm losing it. I call my sister and ask her to listen to what I'm hearing. I gave her my headphones, and she said she hears nothing. Nothing? I took back my headphones, and yes, the static noise was gone the moment I gave it to my sister. This is pretty recent, and I also heard the voice of a rooster for a short amount of time. Can somebody explain why did this happen? Was it technical, or did I really connect to some other dimension? 266. When I was 16, my mother had been diagnosed with terminal, 2 to 3 months to live, cancer. She did treatment and eventually, the pain was too much, so she got euthanasia at home with a morphine pump. My parents were divorced, so I went to my dad's. Woke up to my mother calling me, happy that she decided she wanted to live, and asked me to stop by later. My dad and sister were equally shocked. We went for a coffee, final goodbye, and she died about an hour after we left. To this day, I sometimes ask my dad or sister if it was a genuine experience or not, and I can never truly accept that she called me after a purposefully fatal dose of morphine. 267. This one time I was smoking weed outside this old lady's house I used to live at. I rented out her basement, and there's always been weird thing happening since I've been living there. But this night, I saw a figure walk around the front of my car and proceed to stand next to my driver door. I could sense its presence and I was frozen. It then came through the door and inside my body. My whole body lit up. I can't explain how I felt. I was terrified, but at the same time so vulnerable and open. It was kind of enlightening. 268. I was about 11 years old, and I had a dream. This dream was so vivid and so lifelike. Here is the dream. I had 2 windows in my room, and I was sleeping. Suddenly, I woke up and looked over to a window, and it was fully lit up, while the other was still very dark from the night sky. I walked over to the window and peeked through the blinds and was just blinded. I then completely opened the blinds to see what was causing the light. As soon as I open the blinds, I black out. I come to what looks like a hospital room. It is cold, and everything is gray metal. The bed, the walls, the ceiling, it is all metal. I am hooked up to a machine that is taking my vitals, and I have on a gown. I am restrained to the table, and I cannot move. I started screaming. The door opens to the room. It is like an automatic door that is at stores, and inside walks a few 6-foot creatures inside of a biohazard suit. I could only see their eyes, and they looked like large cat eyes. They were so piercing and fierce. They pushed a button on the monitor, and I immediately lost my voice. They took my blood, vials of it. They started looking at it, and they all started talking amongst themselves while holding the vials. Mind you, this is over top of me. All of them left except one leaf. He pushed the button on the monitor, giving me my voice back, said thank you in a robot voice, gave me an injection in my upper arm and then left. The room went dark. I woke up in my bed the next morning feeling terrified. I was sweating, and my throat was sore, I believe from the screaming. I got out of bed, and I was very lightheaded. The kicker thought my upper arm was sore for a solid week. I told my parents this, and they of course thought I was weird. I would like to think that it was all a dream, but I don't know.
269. My friends and I like to go camping and each year and usually rent some kayaks. Almost as routine, we piled into the car and drove across the campground to the lake where some were for rent. I'll have to admit I can't say who was sober among us. I don't think there were many beverages with lunch, but there were definitely some packed for the kayaks. As we were grabbing our things out of the back of the lakeside parking lot, we heard a girl shout from up the road. There was a steep hill leading to the lake, and coming down the hill were 2 teen girls riding one bicycle. Neither were wearing helmets, and the one in front was shouting that the brakes were not working. I stood in horror as they came down the hill. The girl riding on the back of the bike bailed in the parking lot and scraped her legs up. The other hit a curb and flipped over the handlebars and landed in grass. I panicked almost immediately and ran over to check to see if they were all right. They were both pretty shaken up and sitting in the place where they landed. They seemed alive for the most part, so I went over to the rental building to see if they had first aid. I found a couple of teens who didn't have any idea what to do either, but they did have a first aid kit. As one of them came back outside with me, a small crowd was already gathering. I left them alone because I assumed somebody had it, right? I hope it wasn't too bad because I never found out. There wasn't much of a line for the kayaks, and they were long gone by the time we got off the lake. 270. Not that scary, but a year ago in my hometown I was with my dad at the store buying ice cream or something like that, and around when we were leaving I get this huge sinking feeling in my chest. I felt weird, but thought nothing of it, and when we got in the car my dad got a call 5 or so minutes ago. My great-grandmother had passed away. We were both distraught, and I told Dad that I felt my chest burn at what it seemed to be the exact moment she passed away. He told me he felt it too. Now since that happened, whenever I get a sinking feeling I call my family members to make sure everyone is alright. I have been terrified of that feeling since. 271. When I was a kid my dad would pay me and my siblings every year to go door to door passing out gifts from his company in all the neighborhoods in our city with his logo on it and a greeting card. The policy he gave us was to ring the doorbell and wait 30 seconds for an answer. If they answered, we would spout off the same rehearsed lines to them and give them the gift card. If they didn't answer, we would leave it to the side of their front door. One thing he told us to never do was look through people's windows to see if they had them on the front door. Well, one year when I was about 12 I was doing this and was approaching a house that looked like no one would be home. No cars in the driveway and couldn't see any lights on in the house. Typically, that made it safe to assume no one was home, but I rang the doorbell anyways, just in case. As I waited for an answer, I noticed in my peripheral through the thin windows next to the door that there was a full suite of knight armor standing against a wall. I got curious and broke my dad's rule and looked through the window. The windows on the main level were all blocked off by thick curtains, so it was incredibly dark inside the house, and you could barely see 20 foot inside, as the only light emitted inside was from the small windows I was looking for in. But I was able to see some freaky stuff. Aside from the suit of armor, I saw a row of about 10 of those white theater masks, the creepy ones that laugh and cry, lined up on the wall, torch lamps hung on the walls, Gothic/medieval human portraits on the wall, a dark red medieval-looking pattern on the walls, and a Gothic castle-style chandelier in the front area of the house. Curiously, I looked around through the window for about 40 seconds, and then was ready to just say huh, weird and leave. I left the gift on the porch, and as I found the underlying cause of the porch, I heard the door start to pound behind me. I turn around and the door is shaking and pounding violently in its frame, with constant pounding sounds like someone was rapidly kicking the door with their heels. It only lasted for around 5 seconds, and I sprinted away and on to the next house. I tried to rationalize what it could have been. I saw no human activity coming inside when I was looking in the window, and no one answered the door. It could not have been a dog or something, as it would have started freaking out at the doorbell the moment I rang it. In all likeliness, there was some weirdo living in that house who wanted to freak me out, but it was still really creepy and something I don't really have an answer for. I don't particularly believe in the paranormal, but this experience has always kept a seed of "but what if" in the back of my head. Bonus, I remembered the exact house it was, and when we did this again the next year I specifically went to it to check it out, but everything that was there before was gone and the inside of the house looked normal, and a nice suburban family answered the door this time. Weird. 272. I used to work at a convenience store. When I started college I was transferred to one in a high crime area. So much stuff was constantly being stolen, we were told to just not bother trying to stop any of this. The store closed at 12:30 and we were expected to have it ready for opening. So, I left usually around 1 a.m. All the lights in the parking lot were off and the city did not do upkeep well on the streetlights. Most of the time I don't care, because I grew up in big cities and this is just a thing that happens. One night there was this guy in the lot. He sounded drunk. He kept calling out to me. I just ignored it. There were some security guards that were patrolling nearby, and he wasn't doing anything. But then it's time to close and he's still in the parking lot looking at me. I'm glad my husband was picking me up, because when I did go outside he started walking towards me doing the catcall thing. 273, I was diagnosed with leukemia back when I was 6 and went through chemotherapy for about 2 years. The doctors had me on a feeding tube for reasons I don't exactly remember, but something happened, and the tube had to be removed immediately as it could have caused me to choke or something equally horrifying. The memory is still incredibly vivid. My dad was instructed to restrain me, so he held me and tried to comfort me while the doctors manually started pulling the tube out through my nose. Needless to say, the experience was both uncomfortable and literally traumatizing. My nose was bleeding after the tube was removed. I'm 23 and only recently realized that I might have developed a fear of feeding tubes and extreme anger when thinking or hearing about one being pulled out. 274, living in South America. I lived in Santiago, Chile for a few years. I've had several guns pointed at me, put to my head, or been running to get out of the in-between of gang-related gunfights. While all of those were definitely gnarly experiences, the one that shakes me up the most is this guy I met. We told him I'd be by to pick up to go hit the town and hang. I got to his house and called out. Some places in Chile have doorbell, but mostly you just cup your hands and shout hello. Man comes out smiling, too big, tells me to come in and opens his front gate and then proceeds to tell me that he is the Antichrist and has to kill me and jumps at me with a kitchen knife. The neighbor across the street was in his garden and saw me dodge the knife and jump on top of him. He runs over and jumps on top of him too, helping me as his wife calls the police. Like I said, I've been threatened with death many times, but that was the only time someone actually tried to kill me. Haha, that was decently scary. Most of my dangerous stories are just fun to remember though, because they really were weird, huh? 275, kinda surreal, and I question if it was either my mind playing tricks on me or complete joke by my mother. I don't believe in either, but one day I was in my room watching YouTube and all of a sudden I see and hear footsteps outside of my room. I look below and see a man and I tell him to stay back. I remember extraordinarily little, but every time I talked he got closer, and I just hid in fear. He never spoke or entered. After my mom woke up from her little nap, I told her the events and she believed it was nothing. Still felt real and horrifying. The only other time was my only experience with sleep paralysis, where I was so spooked that I didn't sleep alone for nearly a week.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.